Paul's teaching on the gospel seemed to some to flatten the distinction between Jew and Gentile. Many of the Jewish believers saw this as a betrayal of Israel's privileged status. But Paul's not inconsistent in the book of Romans. In fact, in this letter, he holds a remarkably balanced position. He affirms over and over again, in particular in Romans 3, 1 and 2, and again in Romans 9, 4 and 5, that Israel did have great advantages. He says that they were entrusted with the oracles of God. They received the covenants. They received the law. They received the temple worship. And of course, they received the promises. Yet, his position on the other end is despite all these blessings, Israel, the Jew, stands in the same exact need of salvation as the Gentile does. Basically, his position can be summarized like this. Privilege does not equal righteousness. Just because you have privilege, think about people that grow up in Christian homes today. They've got privilege. I mean, that's a big privilege to be grown up in a home where you are taught the gospel, that Jesus has mentioned, that you're brought to church. But that child, it's not a guarantee they're going to grow up and walk in faith. Privilege does not necessarily equate to righteousness. And it's precisely this theme that launches Paul into his extended argument from Romans 1:18 to 3:23. Because he begins this section by addressing the sin of the Gentile world. He does do that. We're going to look at that tonight. He shows that although they had the law written on their heart, they had general revelation, they had knowledge of God and creation, they, instead of honoring God, they suppressed the truth and moved to idols. And because of this, they're handed over to all kinds of moral and sexual impurity. What we will read today is not just a list of sin, it's a diagnosis of what happens when people abandon God. But with that said, we need to note that what Paul is doing here is a stroke of rhetorical brilliance. Because he's not just targeting Gentiles. Like the prophet Nathan confronting King David in 2 Samuel 12, Paul is setting a trap. And let me explain this. Remember the story? After David had committed adultery with Bathsheba, and he arranged for his husband Uriah to be murdered, he thought his sin was covered. But God sent Nathan, the prophet, to confront him, remember? Now, did Nathan come with him with a direct accusation? You got a man killed and slept with his wife. No, he didn't do that. He told a parable. He told a parable about a rich man who had many sheep. And there was this poor man who had one little ewe lamb that he loved dearly. When a traveler came to the rich man, instead of taking from his own flock, the rich man went and stole that one ewe lamb from that poor man and served it for dinner. Now, David, hearing this story, was outraged. He declared that the man who did that deserved to die. He was angry. How dare that man do that to that poor guy? And it was in that moment that Nathan turned to David and he said, "You're the man." He set a trap for David to indict himself. In that moment, David realized the story was about him, his injustice, his sin, his abuse of power. Well, that's exactly what Paul is doing here. He stirs up this sense of moral outrage in the Jew. Those who might have been reading this and nodding ahead in agreement, like, yeah, you've got those Gentiles nailed. That's exactly what they're like. And then with stunning force, he turns in Romans 2:1 and he says these words, "Therefore you have no excuse, O man, every one of you who judges, for in passing judgment on another, you condemn yourselves." Brilliant. That's why this book's been studied on logical argumentation. He builds this case like, look at how evil the Gentiles are. And they're like, yeah, tell them, Paul. Well, you just indicted yourself. You do the same things. You don't keep the law. You violate all the commands as well. You're a hypocrite. Paul is showing in one masterful stroke that both groups, Jew and Gentile, have failed. The Gentiles reject the law of God through creation. The Jews, having the law and prophets, reject God they knew more intimately. Both are guilty, both are without excuse, and that is why both desperately need the gospel.